Far and wide, deep space photography is the hardest thing to do, but it's also the most rewarding. And what's neat about deep space, there are so many things that you can pick any night of the week, any time of the year. It's almost unlimited amount of targets that you can go for. That's the beauty of it. Next one, please. Planetary is also very rewarding because it's quick. The difference between planetary photography and deep space photography is that you're taking very, very short exposures. The goal is to take as many pictures in the quickest amount of time you can. If you can take 3,000 frames of a video in a few minutes, you're doing great. And of those 3,000 frames that you're taking, because our targets are so bright, you don't need to take long exposures, you're lucky if maybe 100 of them are any good to use to create a nice picture of the moon, the sun, Mars, Jupiter, you know, whatever planet that you're taking a picture of, okay? So the difference between deep space and planetary is you're doing the opposite. You're taking very, very quick exposures and you're taking as many of them as you can. And you hope you get lucky that the atmosphere is not kind of wavering too much for one of those frames where you get a nice sharp picture. Nightscape photography is great because it allows you to not use all this expensive gear. You can use your DSLR camera that you use for your family vacations. And you can take some beautiful pictures with nightscapes of the sky. The difference between nightscape photography and, let's say, deep space is that you're kind of limited to some degree because you're taking very wide fields of the, you know, areas of the sky, and it changes from season to season, but you're not getting those individual targets. What's really unique about nightscape photography, and you've seen it in our photos down there, is the terrestrial component. You know, whether you're near the Grand Canyon or you're near Devil's Tower or you're over a beautiful lake or near some mountain, you can get some really pretty terrestrial targets blended in with your nightscape photos. But there are a lot of challenges in this hobby, and we're going to speak to them a little bit on the following slides. As I stated, with most of our nightscape photography, or deep sky photography, we're dealing with the fact that the Earth is spinning, okay? And because the Earth is spinning and we're trying to take long exposures of these star-like point sources that you're seeing here, if you just put a camera on a tripod with like a telescope on it, guess what you're going to get? You're going to get a whole lot of streaks. And what we're trying to get is really sharp pinpoint stars like you see in the photo around the Earth here. Next. So this is the difference between a guided shot and an unguided shot. The one on the left would be what you would get if you took like maybe, I guess that's about a minute-long exposure with a telescope. On the right-hand side is what we try to shoot for, you know? So we got the unique situation where we're taking pictures of very dim things, and we have these point sources that are going to show you very explicitly your errors, you know? And those errors are going to be streaky messes in your photos, unless you want star trails, but most of the time, we're taking pictures of galaxies and nebulae. You want those stars to be perfectly round. So how do we accomplish that? We do it by using a computerized telescope mount. This happens to be my setup at home. So you have a computerized mount with a telescope on it, the camera's on the telescope. I actually have two different telescopes stacked on top of each other. If I want to take a wide area of the sky, I use the top one. If I want to take very close-up pictures of very small things, I'll use the bigger one. This is an example of what we do in order to accomplish to get that perfect round star situation. You see in this picture here, there's two telescopes. One on the right-hand side is labeled the main scope with the main camera, and the one on the left is what we use, we call it a guide telescope. And the whole idea, next please, the whole idea is what we're trying to do, as you can see in this photo, we take on the guide camera that's on the left up there, it basically brings in the field of stars that you see here. And this software, when you click on the star you want to guide on, what happens is it puts a cross here like you see there. And what it does is it keeps continually telling the telescope mount which direction that star is moving. If it goes even a micron one way or the other, it tells the telescope mount to move the opposite direction so that that star stays on that crosshair all night long. That's our goal. We want that to be as accurate as it could possibly be so we can take 5, 10, 20-minute long exposures to get those pictures that you're seeing in the gallery. Next. So, another important aspect of, it's a hard challenge, believe it or not, because one, if you don't have critical focus, like really sharp focus, and this projector doesn't really do the slide justice, but on the left side you can see it's a lot fuzzier than on the right side, and your goal is to keep it like that all night long. One of the problems with taking pictures in New England is the temperature changes considerably from the start of the night to the end of the night when you stop shooting. And when that happens, believe it or not, your photo may start looking like this, but it'll end up looking like this during the course of the night. And how do you solve that problem? Next, please. There are manual ways to solve that problem. We use something called the Batnoff mask. And what you see there is that thing on the left. It's a mask that you put on the front of your telescope. And when you point it at a fairly bright star, the star is going to look like what you see in the right there. And the way you focus it is, you try to get that center line in between the two crosshair lines there. And when you get that, you know that you are in perfect focus. The thing is, with manual focusing, you've got to do this every hour on the hour at least, because if you don't, your focus is going to drift over the course of the night, okay? What I use is this technique. I have an automated focusing thing. My wife can attest. What I like to do is I'll set up my rig and I'll let it start running, taking pictures, and I'll get my focuser running, and this software will automatically do the thing that you're manually doing up there. It looks at the shape of the star. You know, it does these kind of neat little graphs here, and it tries to make that star to be as pinpoint as it possibly can, and it keeps it there all night long automatically. So when I go to bed, I'll let my rig just run all night long, and when I wake up in the morning, I just go out there and close my roof. You know, that's basically how I do it. Some of the other guys, they really more shepherd their gear all night, but I have the luxury of being able to do the automated focusing. The other challenge is we have very, very dim targets that we're taking pictures of. This is a good example of something that if you looked at the Horsehead Nebula in an eyepiece, you would see nothing. You couldn't see anything. It's so dim, you would not see it unless the telescope was enormous. If it was a really, really big light-gathering telescope, much bigger than anything I have, you'd be able to see something. But with photos, you can really gather a lot of photons. Now you can see the difference between these two photos. The one on the left here is a single 5-minute exposure, and you can see it's not bad, but it's kind of, you know, there's not good contrast. It's kind of like a bit fuzzy. Well, the difference between that and the one on the right is the fact that this is 65-minute exposures that we do something called aligning and stacking. You know, we take those 60 photos, we align them with each other on the stars that you see in the field, and we do something called stacking, where we basically average all the photos down into one photo, and we get this really nice picture that is very, very good contrast. You know, you get a good signal-to-noise ratio, basically, in a photo like that you see on the right. In this photo you've seen, obviously, in the gallery down there, it's a hydrogen alpha picture. And that's how we do things, that's how we beat the challenge of very, very dim objects. We take a lot of pictures. And the beauty about it is, you know, in Gardner, you know, we have a radio beacon that all the aircraft use to basically navigate on. So in the course of an evening, I'll have at least 5 or 6 planes running through my photos. You know, the jets are just running over my observatory constantly. The other good thing about using this technique of stacking is that it averages out all those weird streaks that don't belong there. So, you know, you get a nice picture without all the blemishes that you're going to get from, you know, various things that are running through your photos. It could be a meteorite, it could be whatever. Next, please. So here's an example. You can see what stacking does. Look at the subs. The subs really is the number of frames that are used, and you can see the noise on the very early ones where you have just 1 or 2 subs. The more you get, the more detail you see in your photos, and the less noise that you see. And that's the goal. That's what's called improving your signal-to-noise ratio. The signal being the target you're taking a picture of, and the noise is that background noise that you're seeing in the photos. So the more pictures you take, generally speaking, the better your photos are going to be. By the way, if anyone has questions, please interrupt me. I'd be happy to answer it for you. Okay, so the other challenge with our hobby is there's a lot of technology you have to manage, and you have to get half decent with your Windows gear. So you have a camera. This is similar to the one I have. So this is for like a deep sky, very sensitive camera that you have. You can use DSLR cameras, but there are some limitations to them. So you have software that you use to drive the camera. If you're doing planetary work, you have a video camera that's similar to what you see there. I have one very similar to that. It's a little bigger than the size of the large sugar cube, believe it or not. They're very small, very light, but they take very, very quick, fast frame pictures. You have planetary video capture software that drives the video camera. By the way, that software is free. Most of them are free. You have the guiding software that you use to guide for long exposures. You have to deal with whether you're using manual or autofocus. You have to learn how to use align and stack software. And then you have post-processing like Photoshop afterwards to really make your pictures pretty with the colors and get any other defects that you have left in there out of your photos. So there's a lot to learn, there's no doubt about it. Some of the photography is easier to learn than others, like nightscape is an easier way to start on the hobby, and then you can work your way up through, up to deep sky. But if it's something that you're interested in, I would very, very highly recommend getting a mentor, whether it's an astronomy club in your area. I'm sure they have people like myself that would more than happy teach you how to do this stuff. And you can skip the 5 years of hell that I went through in learning the hobby on my own before I joined the club. Now we have a group of guys that are all into this hobby. Some of them are here tonight, and we're all very much into helping each other through problems. We go to conferences and learn things. So, whether you join Aldrich or some other club, that's a good way to get mentoring on learning this stuff. In fact, I teach an intro course at Gardner Community College on astrophotography. So, there are many venues that you can use, but I would highly recommend joining a club for that. So the solution to learning all this stuff, it takes time, unfortunately, and in the end, you're still going to be doing this. I mean, I can't tell you how many times in the course of the evening that Len is contacting me about something, or I contacted him, or Bruce, or whatever else, and we're saying, God darn it, this thing is not working tonight. This software can't talk to my auto guide camera or whatever. There's no doubt about there's frustration in this hobby, but in the end, there's no better feeling than in the end when you actually have that photo that's finished that comes out really, really good. You know what you went through to get that photo. So in the end, you're really rewarded by the results. Next, please. So these are examples of the backyard observatories that we have. Ken, who takes a lot of the nightscape photography, he doesn't have, his backyard is basically a silo of trees. He can't do anything in his backyard. So he generally has to travel. He's got a portable setup that he travels to various locations. Mostly he goes to our observatory, our club observatory, to take a lot of his photos now. Bruce has a very interesting observatory. His whole building rolls off of his telescope. So it's kind of like a telephone booth. You open the doors and you literally slide the whole building right off of his scope. So it's kind of a neat setup, but it works very well for him. Len is now kind of getting a setup more like mine, but this is what he used to have, and I'll let him speak to it himself afterwards. But now Len has had a dome, and I'll let him speak to why he's decided to now go with a roll-off roof. Mine is this one here. That's my telescope and mount. And basically, it's an 8 by 10 foot shed where the whole roof just rolls right off on those rails that you see there. And it makes it, our club's setup is very similar to that. It's just bigger. And it makes it nice where you have the whole night sky that you have to look at instead of looking through like a slot in a dome. And Chris now has a setup closer to what Len used to have. Chris has moved up from this, but this is a setup that he made himself right off his driveway. And that's how he was taking pictures for the longest time. It literally was a foldable dome that he literally just folded off. But it worked very well for him for the longest time. So I'll first talk to my experiences. I don't know where Bruce ran off to, but I'll let you speak afterwards if you can talk about your own. But I'd say now it's going on maybe, 20 years ago. My wife and I went to our 10th anniversaries out in Arizona. We went on a trip in Sedona, Arizona, and the hotel that we were staying, it wasn't a hotel, it was like a really nice place in the desert. And they had a restaurant, and on the roof of that restaurant, every single night, an amateur astronomer would go out there on the roof of that restaurant, and he had this beautiful telescope, and he would just set it up every night. And that was my first view of anything through a telescope in the night sky, and it was stunning. I mean, he would have the various planets and nebula and stuff like that, and I was always kind of interested, but it really got me hooked. And I'd say maybe within a few years, I ended up getting some gear on my own. I didn't start photography yet, but I got my own gear. And a friend of mine, we went to a place called Rivers Camera in southern New Hampshire, and they had an astronomy show, and at that astronomy show, a friend of mine, Bob, actually won an astronomy camera, one of the very, very early ones that came out that Meade actually put out. And so he had no telescope, he had no use for it, so he gave it to me, and I started playing with it. And like I said, for the first 5 years, what I had was a mess. It was pretty ugly stuff, but I was pretty pleased with myself because I was starting to take pictures of things I wanted to show my friends, that I was looking at through the eyepiece, and I thought, oh, that was kind of cool. It took a lot of years for me to get to the point where I'm at now, and I still think sometimes the stuff I do is not great, but you're still striving for perfection if there is such a thing. So it's taken a long time. I've been doing it for like 15 years, the astrophotography part of it. And I'd say probably more like the last 4 or 5 years, I'm happy with the things that I'm actually doing versus what I had before. So I'll get the mic up to Linda Pinto here, and he can talk a little bit about his experiences.
Well, same with Kevin. I mean, I started, I hate to say it, I started 40 years ago in high school. My older brother had a telescope, and I had a film camera, and I just held the camera up to the telescope and took a picture of Saturn. And when I developed that, and I could see Saturn, and I could see the rings, I was hooked from that point on. And since then, it's just been progressively getting slightly better, slightly different equipment. And as you saw in my observatory, that green pod type thing, the reason I bought that is I had a pier set up in the yard that I used to just cover with canvas. When I wasn't using the scope, I'd take the canvas off, image for the night, and then put the canvas back on it. Well, that plastic pod was very portable. It was easy. I bought it, and I was just able to stick it right over what I had. And I used that, I just got rid of that. I used that pod for the last 10 years. And the only problem is the pod leaks. It's plastic. It's starting to deform a little bit. It leaks. I have to cover it with canvas every time it rains. And there's not an awful lot of room in there. If you look, you got the scope in the middle, and there's just not a lot of space inside there. So now I actually went to Kevin's house, about 2 months ago?
Yeah.
And took a lot of pictures of his observatory. And I'm just finishing up mine, which is basically a clone of his. So I'm hoping to have mine up and running, before the winter, hopefully. So, pretty much.
Next, please. You go to the last slide. I think there's only one act. Yeah. So are there any questions anybody has? I mean, I know we've talked to a lot of you at the exhibit itself. You can put the lights on if you can. Does anybody have any questions?
It doesn't have a concrete pad to put those on?
No. Well, yes. What we have is a pier. Okay. So pier is basically a concrete, silo or whatever it's in essence, it's a sonotube.
Sonotube.
Yeah.
But isolated from the floor.
Right. So you have the sonotube with concrete. You've got to go down at least 4 feet or whatever. And then on top of that, I actually have like a metal pier that's actually bolted into the concrete. And like Len said, none of it touches the floor of the building because you don't want to have any vibrations. Remember, we're talking about microns here of moving stars around. Last thing you want is vibrations from you walking around inside your building. So you want something really, really stable. That's the whole idea. And the beauty about having an observatory is that once you get it polar aligned so that you have the polar scope perfectly aligned with Polaris so that all the stars in theory are going to move around the center point of your telescope, that is as good as you can get, then you're less likely to have problems with tracking errors where your stars are not perfectly round. So, yes, it's a lot easier if you have an observatory in your backyard doing this kind of work, because it takes a long time to set up. When Ken goes out, it can take him an hour, hour and a half before he's ready to take his first picture. For me, it literally takes, once I, center target I'm shooting, 10 minutes maybe, and I'm ready to roll, so that's the beauty about having something in your backyard. Justin?
Yeah, just a quick question. So like you said, over like the night, the temperature drops or changes.
Right.
And it affects the picture.
Yeah.
So what do you guys do in the winter when it's like, freezing cold out? Like, I'm assuming fog, frost over.
Yeah, it's the same thing. That's a good question. Well, as far as the focusing goes, it works the same way. But we have other problems in the winter, or actually even any time of the year, where you can get, where the humidity and the temperature get very close to each other. That's when the fog starts. And what happens is your optics, especially if you're using a reflecting telescope, but even with a refractor where you have lenses, you have a problem where it's going to dew up. And there are ways to solve that. For me, I've got 3 fans in the back of my telescope. I'm not sure if you've ever noticed it. My nephew here. If you've ever noticed it. And the idea with the fans is it actually tries to blow moist air so that it doesn't get to the mirror inside the telescope. It's kind of like a positive ventilation flow. And it works most of the time, but not all the time. But if you have a type of telescope where you have a correcting lens at the front, or if you have a refractor where there's a lens at the front, what you can do is you can put a heat strip. Okay? And if you have a heat strip, it's called active dew heating, and what it does is it just heats up the glass enough to prevent it from getting dewed up at all. Or frosted in the middle of the winter. Make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions? Yeah?
So if I was first starting out doing pictures of a star or a planet, what would you suggest to be the easiest so that I get a big wow?
Well, the weird thing is, the easiest hobby to start in, the easiest part of our hobby to start would be to maybe take a picture of the moon or something like that. One, because it's so bright, and you can do it with a DSLR camera, and you can do it with camera lenses, so that would be a good starting point. You don't need to have a fancy tracking mount or anything like that. You can start out with a camera on a tripod. And if you keep your exposures fairly short, and that's the beauty about bright targets, because they got to be short. I mean, if you're taking a picture of the moon or the sun with a solar filter on it, and let me stress that, you're going to go blind or you're going to burn your camera chip out for sure, otherwise. You can take very, very quick exposures, with a DSLR camera. You could just set it up on a tripod, and you can take exposures that are much less than a second long, and you can get some really beautiful pictures with a regular DSLR camera. Just, it's not hard to do. Even if you're doing pictures like that, I recommend taking a lot of them. And there's free software that allows you to stack and align them so that it really increases the detail that you will see in your photo. So instead of taking one exposure and hope it comes out nice and clear, if you take many of them, it'll actually average out so that you'll get a nice sharp picture in the end. Video cameras are better for the planets, but you can do very well with a DSLR camera.
Yeah, you get a Jupiter and the Galilean moons and do that with my DSLR.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
It's pretty fuzzy, so I'll have to play with this tracking software.
Yeah, you can take some great photos with DSLR cameras. Absolutely. In fact, you can take deep sky photos with DSLR cameras. The limit with DSLR cameras, and most people don't know this, there's actually a filter on them. It's an infrared ultraviolet filter that they put on the cameras, and it actually helps with the color during the daylight. Well, most of us are using them to take pictures. Unfortunately, it blocks out a lot of the light that the dim things that we take pictures of in the night sky actually emit, and that is basically primarily hydrogen alpha and oxygen 3. Those are 2 types of light wavelengths that are put out by a lot of these targets that we're taking pictures of. And unfortunately, the filters on the camera actually block a lot of that light out. So you may not be able to get as much of the nebula or have that nebula be as bright if you're going for the deep sky targets with the DSLR. Now, there are people that do modify those cameras. Unfortunately, if you do that, you void your warranty, with the manufacturer. You can't go back to Canon and say, hey, my camera's not working, you better fix it. Well, you know, that's not gonna happen, because they're gonna say, no, someone messed with this, you know. You can't go back to the manufacturer if you do that, but you can modify the cameras so that they work very much like the astronomy cameras that we use to take the photos that we generally do, so.
Now, Kevin, I haven't tried it, but you can use the video mode on a DSLR.
You could,
right?
yeah.
To do your plans.
Yeah, you could use video mode. The only downside is that you can't do the region of interest. What region of interest is, you know, when you're taking a picture with a, you know, a DSLR camera's got a big chip. And when you're taking a picture of a planet, your planet is not really big, and most of that frame you're not even going to use. Most of it's going to get tossed. Well, what region of interest is with the video cameras, you have the ability of drawing a box just around your planet, and that's the only part of the frame that it's going to download to your PC. And what's nice about that is it increases the frame rate. Remember, I told you that if you take a lot of frames, only a few of them are going to be any good because our atmosphere is doing this kind of thing. And I wish I could show you a video that I have that I took of the moon, and you'll see what I'm talking about. It looks like it's pulsing and phasing around, and it's just a video of the moon through my telescope. And you'll see just how much it's, you know, like the atmosphere is really jiggling things around. The beauty of, you know, when you're doing your video camera is that you have the ability of only using a few of the frames, and those frames are sharp, and you can get some really nice detailed photos.
So software to play with the video too?
You can play with the videos. The faster the frame rate you can get, the better off you are. And I don't think it has region of interest capabilities in the
But
DSLR.
there is free software to sort through the video, to pick out the best frames.
Yep.
And I believe that the stacking software, you can create a region of interest.
You can, so that it cuts out the rest of it. Yeah, yeah. I can give you that afterwards what that software is called. It's free, and it works very nice.
Okay.
Yeah. Any other questions? Or? Well, thank you all very much for coming tonight. I wish everybody would have stayed for the lecture so I could have thanked them all personally, because we had a lot of people go through the gallery tonight. So thank you very much, and I want to thank Valleycast again for having us here.